Since 2002, 14 million disclosures have been processed by the Criminal Records Bureau. While some people say it's an important mechanism in safeguarding children and vulnerable adults, others say it's poisoning the relationship between adults and young people and is an invasion of privacy. In this programme, we're going to look at the vetting procedure and ask, is it working? And are our children safer?
I think it's a system we've needed for years, because whether we like it or not, paedophiles do appear in schools.
Well, in English law, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but the vetting system assumes the opposite.
It won't protect our children. It hasn't and doesn't protect our children.
I think children have the right to safety, and parents have the right to the confidence of knowing that people have been properly scrutinised before they've been given access to their kids.
The first step of the CRB process is one thousands of applicants will be familiar with, filling in a form confirming their identity, address and declaring any criminal convictions. But probably very little is known about the subsequent stages after the form is passed to a body like a local authority. So where does all the paperwork go? And this is where the applications end up, at the headquarters of the CRB, right here in the centre of Liverpool. So let's see what happens next. I've arrived alongside a batch of applications. To show me where they go from here is Communications Manager Mark Faviger.
Well, this is our mailroom where we receive around about 70 to 90,000 application forms per week. All those application forms are x-rayed, they're then opened, and we then check all the application forms for errors. Around about 10% of our application forms are returned to the customer. Once we're accepted the application, we then scan all application forms onto our system through the scanner.
Vetting staff working with children is not a new concept. Prior to the CRB's launch, applicants were checked against List 99, a record of individuals barred from working with children in the education sector. This still happens today, so what's changed?
Criminal Records Bureau, CRB, was launched in 2002. Prior to that, if employers wanted access to information about someone's criminal past or associated information about criminality, they would have to go to individual police forces. Service was rather inconsistent, sporadic, and took any length of time. Bearing in mind what we actually produce at the end of the day here is open access, both to the individual and to the employer, about whether there's any information about someone that may be relevant to an employment decision about whether that individual should be trusted to work with children and vulnerable people. And I think that's one of the greatest issues, I believe, in society at the moment.
What we have here is our call centre. We have around about 80 staff here, and we take calls from our customers, from the general public. This can be general inquiries, application inquiries, basically anything.
What sort of numbers are we talking about?
We're talking volume-wise about 26,000 calls a week.
That's quite a lot.
It is. But the calls that we get are varied and many. They can be callers concerned about an application, could be about a general application, but we try and deal with them as best as possible. We know the concerns of our customers.
OK then, Mark, it's another room full of people. What happens in here?
What happens here is when all the application forms are scanned onto the system, it then enters our system electronically, and we carry out the confidential checks that are required as part of the disclosure service. So that can be checks of the Police National Computer, the Protection of Children Act list, the Protection of Vulnerable Adult list, and List 99.
So this is a highly secure environment, I imagine?
It is. Everybody here is security cleared to the highest level, and one of the skills that they have in here is being able to match an individual to an individual that has a criminal record. It's a highly skilled job, and they always try and make sure they get it right first time, every time.
The people in here can't just sit and tap in anybody's name, can they?
No. Anything they work that they do here is monitored, and we make sure that the only details that are searched and accessed are those that have come in via an application form.
The types of convictions disclosed can range from minor indiscretions like motoring cautions to serious offences like assault. So how effective is the CRB?
What we do know is that over 60,000 people have been prevented from working with children and vulnerable people, specifically on the basis of the information that we've provided to employers. Now that's in addition to the deterrent effect of having the service in the first place.
You were talking about people who are barred from working. What type of people are they? Not necessarily 60,000 paedophiles, are they? They're just 60,000 people who haven't got a job after their CRB check has come back?
That's right. Well, what employers are saying to Ipsos Mori did the research for us, and what they're saying to Ipsos Mori is, based on the information that we've provided, that they've decided in 60,000 cases not to employ the people. Now, that doesn't mean to say they're paedophiles. There may just be, and of course that's not the case. What it means is there may well be information on there that leads them to have a doubt about whether that person should be trusted working with children and vulnerable people. There could be a whole variety of reasons for that. However, I would balance that by saying that we do know that even where we issue disclosure certificates with information on, over 90% of employers are actually still choosing to recruit those people.
I think what you can say is it's a major step forward, because what it means is that at least the minority of people who are convicted will not have access to children, be alone with children. In the old days, they would have waltzed into any school, any children's home. No one would have asked any questions. If there was a gap in their history, well, they would find a good explanation. Now, we look at the records of people with convictions of this kind, and they cannot take up post, and that is terribly important, really important.
After all the relevant checks have been made, the CRB issues a disclosure certificate, both to the applicant and the employer. In the majority of cases, checks do come back clear, but there are issues surrounding the validity and workload of the vetting system. So what do the head teachers responsible for checking their staff think about it?
It's very important that the CRB process is robust. Let's just get that on record, and we, making sure there are safeguards there for young people in our schools. Absolutely important. By and large, I think that's working well. We were concerned about the level of CRB checking, and it is an additional administrative task, but it has to be done properly.
They play a big role in my life, actually, because constantly having to redo them for people, and people who've already got them and keep doing them is quite an onerous task, really.
It's an inconvenience in many ways, in that if you are making an appointment, it might even be of somebody who is well known to you, but until you've actually done the check, they can't start working with the children. But having said that, I think it is vitally important that it is done.
I'm absolutely happy with it for someone who's committed to working in the school quite a lot. But it's very hard, like when you have a work experience 14-year-old come in for 2 weeks, who's meant to be CRB checked, or when you've got a parent who's just doing a football run, one-off, and is meant to be CRB checked. These things are when you have to sort of think to yourself, I can still use a bit of head teacher's discretion.
If you were employing a teacher,
yes,
and their CRB check came back and it was absolutely fine, except they'd had a little theft conviction when they were 18 years old, would that affect your judgment on that person?
Trust them with the dinner money. No, it wouldn't bother me, I don't think, at all.
The CRB got off to a shaky start, with backlogs of checks preventing thousands of people taking up positions in schools. Things have improved, with checks now taking between 2 and 4 weeks. But other, more serious issues may undermine the entire vetting procedure.
The police national computer depends on people putting information into it. And like any human-made system, it's prone to mistakes, meaning that an innocent person could be confused with a criminal.
That's exactly what happened to Emma Budd, who was confused with someone with the same name while applying for a carer's job in 2005.
I had a letter back from the CRB asking if I had ever lived in a certain address in Newport, so they had conflicting information. So sent them a letter back saying no, and gave them a list of the whole address, all my address history. And then after that, I had a letter back from the CRB with saying that I had 2 convictions of shoplifting.
And how did you feel?
Really annoyed, because I was going for this job and I knew once that came through, the job would be gone.
After appealing to the CRB that the convictions were not hers, Emma was asked to attend her local police station and provide a set of fingerprints.
I had my fingerprints taken, came out and seen my grandparents' friends, which was extremely embarrassing, because they phoned my grandparents then asking questions why was I in the police station and things like that. I did really feel like a criminal, the way I was treated in the police station and stuff like that, with the fingerprints, and awful.
After successfully appealing against the mix-up, Emma went for another job 6 months later, only to have the same thing happen all over again.
I had a letter back then from the CRB with the same convictions, even though they promised me that everything would have been cleared.
The process relies on getting the identity of the applicant correct. If it isn't, the accuracy of the whole procedure is undermined, with potentially serious consequences. So how could this happen?
We sometimes find here that where we're going through the very sensitive matching exercise, which some people might think is an accurate or precise science, it is not. We often find there are people who've either used another person's identity, which could be an old school friend, it could be we've known sisters, brothers, and that is found on police records. My staff then have the job, and in certain instances, make an absolutely perfect match. The details are identical. They have no knowledge that this might be somebody who's taken somebody else's identity or abused someone's identity, and therefore we make a decision to reveal that, to make the match and reveal the information.
After a second appeal, the mistakes on Emma's disclosure have been corrected, and she now has a clean police record. But cases like hers have highlighted a potential flaw in the system.
If an innocent person is prevented from working through a CRB check, surely it then makes sense that a guilty person can pass a CRB check and end up working with children.
Bear in mind the example that you're quoting to me is where someone may well have used someone else's identity when in contact with the police. They would have to go through a process with the employer to use the similar identity details and for the employer to confirm it is that person. I think that's highly unlikely. Highly unlikely.
But you couldn't rule it out?
One can never rule that out.
The amount of times that I've actually cried over this is unbelievable. It's embarrassing because the stress and everything. It's caused a lot of upset, and really, really emotionally it's been awful.
We're not insensitive to this because there are human consequences here that I'm well aware of, where somebody gets a disclosure and it says you've been convicted of it and it's not them. I'm well aware of that. It halts and sometimes completely stops someone getting a job. That is awful.
It's always going to be in the back of my mind thinking, is it going to happen again or not?
While a disclosure will highlight convictions, it may also unearth false allegations, so-called soft evidence, meaning that a teacher may not get a job in the future on the basis of a completely unfounded allegation from their past.
There are still exonerated accusations being left on CRB checks, and we claim that that's an abuse of human rights. It is quite wrong to be innocent and yet to be still stand accused and have your future, not only your future career, but your future life blighted by something which could be a malicious allegation.
Well, in English law, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but the vetting system assumes the opposite, that if someone's made an allegation about you, that's enough reason to make you a dodgy person who shouldn't be near children.
3 years ago, primary head teacher Mary MacDonald was falsely accused by parents of slapping a child in her school. While completely exonerated, she still has anxieties over what might be held on file.
Is my false accusation on a record somewhere, just in case I'm accused again? And then they'll put two and two together. Now, I don't like that. I think that's appalling. And CRB checks, the Criminal Record Bureau checks, that's a major cause for concern for me.
The decision to record allegations, even if they're unproven, is at the discretion of local police chiefs. This lack of consistency is causing alarm.
You can get a very eager chief police officer who says, mud sticks. Put every accusation onto a CRB check. Now, if mine was on there and I went for another job, and a panel are looking at that and they're saying, oh, she had an accusation made against her 3 years ago. We'll maybe put that to one side because I'm sure that's what will happen.
There's no doubt that a teacher with that sort of allegation, arguably a head teacher, as Board of Governors, when they're looking to employ somebody, 50-50, one or the other, this one's got a false allegation, well...
You made that up. You say there's no doubt. But there is doubt, because people are sensible, and they look at the allegation in the whole context.
I am not responsible for the decision-making, the very difficult decision-making the police service have to make. because on the one hand they can be potentially accused of not revealing information if anything untoward were to happen in future. And then you of course have the cases where people are entirely innocent, but the police have got judgments to make about whether to reveal that information. Under the law, the legislation under which we operate, if the police decide that that information should be revealed to an employer, we have to reveal it to the employer and to the individual. Ultimately, of course, the employers still have to make that decision about whether to employ or not.
It wouldn't be so time-consuming or so expensive if it were just against these existing registers of people who have committed sex offences. It's because we're actually trawling through police records and soft data that it is such a cumbersome system.
Until we have a legal system which provides justice for children, which at the moment I'm afraid it doesn't, which is why the number of convictions is so low, although the amount of disclosures is increasing. More children are talking about abuse, it's being investigated, they are being believed by social workers and the police, but still they don't get convicted in court.
Should there just be a guideline, yes we accept soft evidence, or no we don't?
I think it should be clear, no we don't. Would you like it if you were accused of something like that? How would you feel? You're asking me how I feel. I think I've made it clear. It's the worst thing that ever happened in my career. But I think what it can affect more than anything is your own personal life as well as your job prospects. Unless you're accused, you've no idea what that does to your personal life.
In a statement, the Association of Chief Police Officers told us individual forces take a judgment on what information they place on CRB forms based on each individual case. In making their judgment, forces draw on Home Office advice. So if an allegation were to accompany a candidate's application, how much of a barrier would it really be?
Do you think that sort of false allegation that's been proven to be false should appear on a CRB check or not?
No, I don't think it should do, but if it did, you would have to question it and see whether it was false or not.
I think the danger is you don't know if it's unfounded. And also, we don't tend to employ teachers or any other members of staff come to that unless they've had a successful CRB check in the first place. I think it would depend on the nature of the allegation, to be quite frank.
A false allegation appearing on a CRB check would not deter me or influence me from appointing that person.
Including soft evidence divides opinion. Some argue there's no smoke without fire. Others say it renders meaningless the idea of innocent till proven guilty. So what's the way forward?
Because we see that happening, it's an issue that we've opened discussions with Home Office colleagues about and other government departments, and indeed the police service.
Is there a willingness there to deal with this false allegation issue?
There's certainly a willingness to look at it, and if that needs something doing about it, then I'm sure that things will happen. But we have to think about what might those things be. And in this instance, I'm homing in on whether the police service in particular need any additional guidance.
I'm more fortunate than some heads. That didn't go into my CRB. But I am happy to do a yearly CRB on myself to see if just somehow, with the change of a CPO, if that changes for me.
In addition to the mechanical process of the CRB checks, there are ethical issues associated with disclosures.
What is it saying more about our society as a whole, about what has been our cultural shift? And to me, what it says is that this police check sits more firmly into the fact that these days we fear and mistrust ourselves and each other much more. Why should people who want to help in their community and want to particularly help vulnerable people or children be police checked as if they are somehow criminal? Why are we beginning to treat people like that?
But we are saying, are we not as a society, that everybody is guilty until they've got that piece of paper, until they've been through the checking process?
No, we're saying this is your driving licence for working with children. This is the bit of paper that says, yeah, you can work with children.
But until you've got that, you are an unsafe adult. You have been, albeit not through a legal process, you have been convicted in a sense because you don't have that piece of paper that exonerates you, or at least gives you the right to work with children.
It's a qualification. That's all it is, it's a qualification. I am qualified to be a trustee of the LSPCC and a president of Childline. Part of my qualification is that I've been checked to see if I've got criminal convictions. That's fine. I would expect that. You know, if I go out in my car, I would expect someone to say, have you got a driving licence? It's fine.
Whether you've got that piece of paper in your hand in the first place can depend on how long you've been in the job. There's no requirement to check staff in place prior to 2002. This potentially leaves thousands of teachers without a disclosure. Bristol is one local authority taking a lead in closing this loophole. It's not just retrospectively checking staff, but continuously vetting them every 5 years.
There was general agreement that was the right thing to do in terms of our responsibility to safeguard children. Clearly individual members of staff may have concerns about having a recheck, but in general we haven't experienced any difficulties with staff cooperating in that process.
The staff of Briarwood Special School are some of the teachers who've gone through the process.
We're still going through some of the people who weren't checked originally, like me, and I have been recently. But we shall arrive at a point where all staff have been checked and are then checked automatically every 5 years. I think if you approve of it as a principle, that actually, yes, that's very important. Otherwise, checking somebody once in their lifetime might be regarded as enough, and it obviously isn't.
Just because you've been doing it for a long time doesn't necessarily mean you're really good at it or that you're safe to be around these students. I think that's the most important part about it, looking at the teachers that have been, or staff that have been working with these kids for a long time.
I think I'd worry about staff who were concerned about being looked into because they shouldn't have anything to hide. I mean, my priority, frankly, is the pupils. So if staff have issues around being checked, then perhaps they should do a job where they're not working with vulnerable children.
A decent head teacher, a decent teacher would wish to say, right, to their school, it's not obligatory, but I want you to have the confidence of knowing that I've been properly vetted, particularly if I'm asking my new staff to go through the same process.
The CRB process is essentially an administrative one, but critics would argue that by going down the box-ticking route, what we're actually doing is damaging our ability to make human-to-human judgments.
If somebody has committed sex offences against children, then it is sensible to know that and not want to employ them. But the way that we run it at the moment is that we collect a vast amount more data than that, which is irrelevant to that judgment. And so it obscures the person's ability to make a good judgment.
It's suddenly seen as somehow we need to be suspicious about that person. And the only way that we can tick that person off our kind of suspicious radar is to get a CRB check.
The real safeguard for children in school is the deep knowledge that head teachers and others have of those people working in those schools. And by and large, that knowledge is pretty safe and secure. Now, we know that in the past there have been a couple of horrendous exceptions to that, which is why CRB checking, the mechanical backup, needs to be there.
The need for vigilance post-CRB check was seen at Sandy Lane School in Monmouthshire. Benjamin Warner was struck off the teaching register after being found guilty of pinning a 5-year-old against a wall and shutting 3 others in a store cupboard.
The teacher was observed teaching as part of the appointment process, and then the CRB check was asked for once the appointment had been made. That came back with no problems, as did the references. But as with any teacher coming into a school, I'd always want to make sure they were well supported and that the children were comfortable with the teacher was comfortable with the children.
It was the watchfulness of the school staff which brought Mr. Warner's behaviour to light, not the CRB. So do they still have faith in the system?
I still think it's a very important process. It's something I wouldn't want to be without. It is a lot of work, but it gives a lot of people peace of mind. But it isn't the be-all and end-all.
The most important check is that gut feeling you've got for somebody, based on, of course, the evidence that you've got through a CRB check. And I think those two things together make a very formidable barrier to anybody wanting to enter the school system for purposes other than education.
A CRB is, at the end of the day, is just a piece of paper that shows that nothing's happened in the past, but I think we've always got to be vigilant in school because circumstances can change.
I think it's part of being risk averse. It's avoiding blame by saying the way to make the school safe is to do the vetting. And as long as we've done the vetting, then you can't blame us for anything that goes on. It's about protecting the adults, not about protecting the children.
So you think that CRB gives more protection to adults than it does to children?
Yes.
How?
Because it allows the school teacher to say, well, I've done the CRB check, so if anything goes wrong now, it's not my fault, mate. I've done my bit.
So after 5 years of the CRB disclosure process, what's been the impact? And are our children safer?
I think it's flawed in certain areas, i.e. that false accusations are kept on record just in case it comes up again. But I think it's the best system we've had ever.
If it just cuts down one incident in 10, 20 years, it makes children safer.
Young people, for starters, won't learn what it is to make decisions and make judgments about a risky situation or an unrisky situation.
Most adults are safe. Most adults, if a child goes to them in distress, would want to help, not hurt. And so we're giving a very false message to children, and we're giving them a feeling that the world is more dangerous. There are a lot of dangers in the world, but we don't need to exaggerate them.
Convicted criminals cannot have sole access to children, vulnerable children, and as they once did. It's not foolproof. We need to improve it, but it's the best we got at the moment.